So when I think about tissues, I think about Chex Mix or trail mix. And it turns out there's a ton of different types of tissues. Just like if you were to open a bag of some sort of trail mix, you'd have a whole bunch of different things inside of it. And so, excuse me, what we are doing with tissues is that we are learning how to sort these things into categories, group them, and then continue to split them down. So if I was to look at this, so I'm going to do Chex Mix first, and then I'm going to show you how to think about it with tissues. But if I was to look at this Chex Mix, I might initially look at it and think, man, how am I going to group this into two separate categories? And you can look at this right here. It's kind of a flat little potato chip. That's also a rather flat chip. This, well, not so flat. It's a pretzel. Okay, this looks like a Cheeto. Also not so flat. This kind of looks a little bit like a tube, and this is kind of like a tube. So, well, I wonder if I can take these two things, which are both relatively flat-ish. I'm going to put them in a category. Okay, so that's a category. So everything in here, even though it's not perfectly alike, it is flat. Okay, and then these over here, well, they're not flat, and they're kind of like little tubes. This looks like a little tube. This is a tube. It goes in a circle, but they're all tubes. So I've just separated it into two categories. Now, because everything in here is not exactly the same, I may want to create a subcategory. And so I might say, well, I'm going to put all of the ones that have regular ridges, okay, those all go into one subcategory, okay, while all of these others that are rather triangular shaped, don't have the ridges, those go into another category. Now here I've got my tubes, but I could say, well, some of these tubes, they go in a circular pattern. And so I'm going to put all of those together. And then these, they don't go in a circular pattern. They're like more like just kind of one straight shot off, okay? So, if you can see originally, this is one broad category, flat. This is another broad category, tubes, okay? But then, if I want to sub-split, I've got wavy, and not wavy but triangular. I've got tubes that make a pattern, and I've got tubes that are just a straight shot. They don't curve around too much. Okay? So this is what we're going to be doing with tissues, is we're first going to be putting tissues into big groups, and everything within that group is going to have that some sort of characteristic in common. But you can subdivide them just like we did here, and they're going to have their unique characteristics that put them into that subcategory. Okay, so here's what I've done, and you have this on your Active Learning tab. But here what I've done is I've printed off images, these are from your textbook, of the 4 different types of tissue. Okay, we've got our 11 connective tissues, our nervous tissue, our epithelial tissue, our skeletal tissue. And because it's all of our tissue types, I'm just going to label tissues up here at the top. My label of tissues up at the top. Now we have our 4 types. Okay, this here is going to be muscle. This is epithelial. This is connective. This is nervous. Okay. And so what you need to do at this level, just like we did with the trail mix, is you need to think about what do all of these different types of muscle have in common that these other types do not have. Okay, so one thing you might think of, well, all muscle contracts. An epithelial, connective, nervous system, it doesn't contract. And so that's what I want to list by the name, is that muscle does contraction. And that's what this says here is contraction. Okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to think about each of these types and think, what makes epithelial tissue unique? What makes connective? What makes nervous? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through muscle with you and how you should think about it. And then I will let you do epithelial, connective, nervous on your own. Those are a little harder, and I think it's actually beneficial for you to come up with it on your own. But I would encourage you, as you come up with these big graphs, maps, whatever, feel free to take a picture of it with your cell phone, send it to your instructor, and ask for some feedback. That's what we're here for. Okay, so I'm going to clear these off for a minute, and I'm left with just muscle. Okay, and so there's 3 types of muscle. We don't have any subgroupings. Okay, and so that's what I'm going to show here. Now, the reason why I don't have the names of it listed out is because I think it's beneficial for you to learn to look at the pictures and try to see if you can figure out the names by looking at it. And so one of the things you might be listing down here are going to be visual cues that help you learn what are the names of these things. So we could do 3 categories, but actually as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, maybe I want to do something else. So I'm going to scratch this out, and I think I'm going to put this one over here, and I'm going to list this as striations and no striations. Okay? And so then once I go to striations, I'm going to have 1 type and 2 types. So this is going to be skeletal. This here is cardiac. And this over here is going to be smooth. Okay? So I've just helped myself so that if I know that I have muscle, it's going to contract. If I don't see striations, it has to be smooth. Okay, and if I see striations, then I have 2 choices. Okay, and so let me think about listing what's different between skeletal and cardiac. Okay, so and let me turn it here just a little bit closer there. Okay, so there we go. So what's the difference between skeletal and cardiac? Well, the skeletal, I might list that there's greater, or I could say that there are many nuclei per cell. Okay, where cardiac has 1 to 2 nuclei per cell. I could list that skeletal muscles have long cells. I could list that they, that the nuclei are off to the side of the cell. On cardiac muscle, I could list intercalated discs. I could list branching cells. I could also list that cardiac is found in the heart and that it's involuntary. I could list that skeletal is voluntary. Okay, and so these are just some examples of things that I could list that help me to know the difference between skeletal and cardiac. What does skeletal have that cardiac does not? Okay, and you could do the same over here for smooth. You could say it's involuntary. You could say that it has short spindle-like cells. You could say it has one nucleus per cell. Okay, and we could also say where we find it. So we could find it around a lot of the tubing of the body. Okay, so these are just some examples of how you can go about creating your own maps to be able to recognize some of these differences. I want to point out what I did here. I first started out with 3 categories, and then I changed my mind and I decided to group it based on striations and no striations. There's really, as long as you are including correct information, there's really no correct or incorrect way to do it. I could have decided to group cardiac and smooth together based on involuntary muscle and then skeletal muscle on its own because it's voluntary. So there's a lot of different ways that you can choose to do this grouping. For the connective tissue, I would encourage you to do the groupings according to the organizational structure in your text and in the homeworks. I think that will help you out to at least do it once that way, but if you want to think about it in other ways, please feel free to do that. You shouldn't